Um, they did it. Dead Island 2 is a resounding success and has surprised me in ways that I did not expect to be surprised. And it exceeded all of my expectations, and I think a lot of people's expectations when it came to this game. It's very good. It's very good. It's not great. It's close, but it's not great. It could definitely use, I think, some areas for improvement. There's definitely ways that they can build off of this foundation for a potential sequel and stuff like that. But what is here is just so far and beyond anything that I expected. And even when comparing to the first game, it is just light years ahead of anything that was created from that experience. This is exactly everything you would want in a AAA quality release. Even without the gameplay design and all that stuff, if you just look at the quality that it came out in, it's exactly what you want. No performance issues, beautiful visuals, no bugs, no glitches, none of that. It is a well performing and beautifully looking game on all systems. And being that that is such a rarity, especially these days, it is quite a refreshing taste to see a game come out and to actually have this level of quality just on its own. So I want to talk about exactly why this game is outside of just a quality state, which is tremendous. I want to talk about why the design of this game and a lot of the features and stuff is quite excellent. Again, it's not perfect, but what is here is very, very, very solid. And this makes me excited for a potential sequel taking place in a different city or wherever maybe. So before we move on to the review for Dead Island 2, I just want to briefly touch upon my history with the original game. I have mentioned it several times on this channel, but being that this is a review for, a sequel within the franchise, I do think for posterity's sake it's worth mentioning here again. I thought the original Dead Island was one of the worst games that came out during the 7th generation, and it almost started immediately with the misleading advertisements. They created one of the best trailers in games. Still to this day, I consider it one of the best trailers in games. That kind of set what I think a lot of people were expecting the tone of this game to be. I was expecting this to be an emotional narrative about the loss of a zombie apocalypse taking place in this beautiful tropical island that was quite a departure from a lot of the worlds and other locations of what games were taking place in during the time. And so I was just expecting this, beautiful story again that dealt with a lot of emotional weight behind what a zombie apocalypse, what potentially a zombie apocalypse could do to people. And I was very much looking forward to it and very excited for it. When Dead Island finally came out, it was both a mechanical and technical mess. Not only did the game just have major frame rate issues across all versions of the game, and a lot of visual errors and glitches, just had a pretty ugly presentation for the time. The actual core design of the gameplay mechanics, the way the combat felt, the lack of any storytelling, upgrades and craftings, the animation, the whole movement of the game just felt off. It felt like a game that was kind of half-baked, a lot of ideas that just didn't really mesh well together. And I have attempted to play that game twice, and both times I came up short, quitting on the game before I even got halfway through the experience. I just couldn't do it. So, those developers would go on later to create the Dying Light franchise. The original Dying Light is one of the best games during the 8th generation. I still stand by. So it's quite amazing to see them go off, the developers of Dead Island, to go off and create one of the best games from the worst games. And then, Dying Light 2 came out, and it was also an unfortunate mess. Not quite on the level of the original Dead Island, but definitely did not hit on, I think, a lot of people's expectations. But still, hey, it's one of those situations where, the developers went on and kind of redeemed themselves with the later game. At this point, the Dead Island franchise would be moved to a different development studio, and it's here where the issues started really cropping up. It would turn out to be a 9-year development life cycle, changing hands from different studios, and it took Dambuster Studios, the guys behind the Homefront The Revolution game, which, also came out in a rather questionable quality state, I might add, to actually fully release this game. And what they have put out here is a game that is slightly disconnected from the original vision of what we were shown in 2014, but is on its own a very, very solid experience, and probably is mechanically and functionally a superior game to whatever we were going to get with the original vision. So I think what I want to touch upon first is the location of Dead Island 2. Being that I am actually from the Los Angeles area, I didn't grow up specifically in the downtown area of where this game kind of takes place in, but I'm very familiar with the real life location of the game. And so I was very surprised to see that they recreated, I should say, all the locations, the streets, the structures to almost a painstakingly scary accuracy at times. It's almost terrifying when you actually look at real life images compared to the game. It looks so lifelike, it's absolutely crazy. They changed a couple things in regards to actual licenses for a lot of these companies, but a lot of the locations that you'll actually visit throughout the game are actual almost one-to-one recreations of how these places look in real life. And it is quite staggering at times. You know, as I was walking down Venice Beach in this game, it just blew my mind, the level of painstaking accuracy and just the hard work that these developers put in to fully recreate exactly how these locations should look. And it's absolutely insane. And even the interiors of these homes, because you'll actually go through, you know, neighborhoods like Beverly Hills, you'll go inside a lot of these big mansions and whatnot that a lot of people live in, and each home is almost designed specifically, like individually from another. There's no duplicate, you know, types of styles and furniture and all this stuff. It's not like if you walk into a house across the street from another, it's going to be the same house but a different layout. It's incredible. They actually went as far as to completely change the way that the style of the homes look. And I'm not talking about the exterior, I'm talking about the interior styling. So you like walk into a home, it might be an older home that hasn't been updated with all new appliances versus one that is fully modern, different style of furniture, you know, a more minimalist style versus something that's a little bit more traditional. All this is just recreated from a level that is so astonishing that when I first looked at it, you just feel so immersed, like you're really placed right there in the bedrooms of these places. And it's astonishing. You're looking at all these houses, and it just blew my mind. There's only been a very few number of games that have done that for me, and a lot of them are more fictional locations where, you know, they build these locations up in a more sci-fi or a fantasy aesthetic, but here it's actually real life. And it's been a long time since I played a game that looks quite like this. The level of detail is quite high like this. The number of assets are as unique as this. It just blew my mind, and I think it is really one of the most attractive draws for when you're playing this game, is that you're actually going to want to go through and see all the locations and explore all the different alleys and the different, you know, buildings and houses, because you're just going to want to see exactly all the effort that these these developers have put into the game. And again, all the houses are very unique and independent of one another. You're not going to walk into a home across the street and see, oh, it's the same exact house, it's just in the reverse layout. It's nothing like that in this game. It's almost everything is just completely, you know, independent of one another. And to have an experience like this, I think this game is very close to being a current generation showcase, which is a surprise to me because this is a cross-generation game and you think it hold it back. But when I was playing this game on PS5, I felt that I was getting an experience that was very indicative of what a PS5 should be able to power, and one that I felt was even beyond anything that I would get on a PS4, which I think really just kind of goes to show you the level of artistic input that these developers have injected into this world. It's just astonishing, and it needs to be seen for itself. When you're exploring these environments, you're going to want to actually go around and go into every single building and every single store and every single house, just to see and just be a part of that world. And just this, again, it's going to blow your minds. Now, I mentioned earlier that graphically this game is very impressive and gave me the impression that I was playing on current generation hardware. This is a cross-generation game. You can get this on PS4, you can get this on the base Xbox One, and it actually runs pretty well on those systems considering the hardware. On PS5, I was getting a near 4K resolution. I think it's 1800p or whatever, but 60 FPS, and it is an unwavering performance. It does not dip whatsoever, at least on PS5. The resolution is super sharp. It looked effectively like native 4K to me from a normal viewing distance. And the HDR presentation is almost reference quality. It's very, very, very good and does a great job sort of, highlighting the more artistic touches of how a sunset-soaked boulevard should look in Los Angeles. It does a great job with just the highlights and the color details and all that stuff. So HDR is a definite must for this game if you're going to play it. But the actual level of detail that is on display is, I think, very indicative of what you would expect from a current generation only release, which is quite astonishing to me. Usually with a lot of these cross-generation games, you can kind of see the cutbacks almost. You see where areas of the image could be a bit blurrier, where they could scale back on a few things like foliage and stuff like that, but here, there's just so much detail on your screen at one time. The texture quality is pin sharp. All the assets are just very, very detailed and hold up well, even going directly up to them. You can put your face right up to some of these assets, and they hold up very, very well. You don't really see a lot of polygonal edges on some of these. And just everything from the game just has a very, very pretty aesthetic. I was very impressed with the visual quality of this game. It doesn't have any ray tracing, and I think perhaps the biggest drawback to the visuals is the reflection quality, especially in this game, because going up to mirrors, what they use are cube maps, which are just effectively low resolution images of the environment that it's supposed to reflect. That kind of change depending on your, the location, position of the actual player. It changes the perspective a bit, but it's here where you kind of notice the drawback of some of the visuals, because the mirrors in particular in this game, anything that's kind of reflecting the environment head on, definitely looks quite poor. And it is almost noticeable because the rest of the game just looks so phenomenal that when you walk into a room and you see a mirror and you're like, oh, it's really reflecting a very low two-dimensional image of the environment that looks nothing like the actual thing that I'm staring at. So it's only in those particular moments do you really notice the drawbacks of the visuals. Perhaps if this game had ray tracing, they could have completely taken that problem away, but that probably would have ensued a 30 FPS cap. And I wonder if the performance of this game, or even the PC version, they might later on patch that in, because I feel like that would definitely push it above. That would definitely push it more towards a current generation only release here, what you would expect from a visual standpoint. But as far as the main game goes, when you just look at everything, when you're just playing the game, you're just in these natural environments where you don't have mirrors everywhere, it is quite beautiful. And I was not at all disappointed with the visuals that were on display. I was actually impressed a few times, and they just work in tandem so perfectly with the art direction to really just bring these environments to life in a way that is so high quality, and one that is going to really surprise you and immerse you throughout the entire experience. I also need to mention that sound is pretty good. It's got good directional placement for surround sound, so if you're playing on a true 5.1 setup, you're going to be able to hear zombies in the back and to the sides of you very clearly. On a soundbar, there's decent separation. This is where I basically play the majority of my experience. So on a soundbar, it's pretty decent as well, but definitely if you have a surround sound setup, you're going to basically hear exactly where the zombies are and know exactly where they are at almost all times. So there's really good channel separation when it comes to the audio mix of this game. Now let's get on to the actual gameplay. Here is both a very good thing, it's a positive thing, but also there's areas for improvements. This is, I think, one of those things where it's keeping the game from actually reaching a great game status, okay? Now, functionally, the game actually handles the combat very, very well. You actually have a card system which acts as sort of a replacement for a skill tree, and I have to say that I usually don't care for a lot of card systems in games, but in this one in particular, it's done in a very, very great way. I actually prefer this a lot to the skill trees that we typically see with a lot of games of this style. So the card system acts as both a choice selection for how you want to spec out your character. You can have one that's more buffed on defense, more buffed on special abilities and moves, more buffed on agility or health or whatever the case may be. So you can match the card style depending on your type of, I guess, your play style to how you actually play the game. If you're more a defensive player, if you're more like an up-in-your-face combat type of player. So this card system is actually quite well done because it allows you to spec out your character in a variety of different ways. And I actually found for this reason, because I played through the entire game as the Jacob character who's on the front cover of the actual main game, the physical release. So I actually think that this card system is very good because it allows you to choose any of the characters you want just from an aesthetic style, so if you like one particular character's look or maybe their voice acting versus the other, you could choose them just for that reason and not care so much about the specs, and then you could use the card system to actually spec out your character the way that you would like to have them have certain buffs, whether it's defense, agility, or whatever the case may be. So I actually really like this system a lot, spending a lot more time with it during my course of the game. I thought it was a great system that definitely was better and preferable to me than a skill tree. Outside of that, the game's combat is pretty passable, and it's here where I feel the game loses a bit of its spectacle. When I was first getting into the game, I really thought that the combat didn't feel as connected to my inputs on the controller versus what I was actually seeing on screen. And I'm not talking about actual input latency or anything like that. I'm talking about the way the combat actually looks from a visual perspective. So it's a simple, one press button to attack, but your character kind of looks like he's almost painting the environment, right? Like he's going up to a zombie and he's just kind of waving his arms like this. And it just looks a bit disconnected, like there's not enough of a visceral, satisfying crunch when you're actually hitting some of these zombies. It's a bit slow at first. You can get upgrades for your weapons later on. So as you do continuous attacks, you can actually increase the weapon's speed or just increase its speed outright. And this does help a bit when it comes to the combat. But I did feel that the combat could at times feel a bit disconnected from what you were actually doing, or what you're actually seeing, I guess, on the screen rather. So it felt fine mechanically when I was actually playing the game, and I feel like all the controls and the way that this game actually feels with the controller is perfectly fine. Very good feedback. The PS5 controller uses haptic feedbacks on the triggers and does it in a very light and non-aggressive way so that it doesn't become an annoyance or actually cause your fingers any sort of pain. So I like the way that this game feels to play. I just feel like the visual feedback of the combat could have used a little bit more of a visceral take, at least when it comes to the actual hits, the indications of when your weapon hits a zombie. It almost feels completely disconnected. That being said, it's quite interesting because the actual gore system in this game, this is worth touching upon as well. I'm going back to almost a visual aesthetic. You guys remember playing the Dead Space remake, and it was like, wow, you could really tear apart the necromorphs, and you can see bones and just all these different limbs kind of dangling from just a little layer of skin. This has gone even a step further in Dead Island 2 to the point where this is now it's super impressive, but this is now, I think, the poster child for exactly how gore and just overall bloody violence should be handled in games. It is to the point where it's disgusting. It is impressive. You almost can't look away because when you're looking at some of these zombies that are mangled, and as you're doing different weapons, it'll do different styles of damage. You're not just ripping the skin layer. You'll actually do it to the point where you'll tear apart the entire shell and the muscle structure of the body. And you'll see things like the heart beating inside of the chest and under the rib cages. The veins of these zombies, like actually you'll see like the virus almost flowing through their veins. The fucking eyeballs are like falling out and like just hanging by a thread, and you can see like the inner workings of their brain, and it's to the point where it even extends to muscle tissue and fat as well. You'll come across some quite obese zombies, and even if you don't slash them or cut them open, you just kick them, like it's insane. Like their whole stomach, like just like it has physics attached to it. I haven't seen anything quite like this in my entire life. It's insane, and the Dead Space remake really made it a point to kind of talk about you can really just tear the necromorphs apart. Well, you can tear these guys apart and then see all the different structures of the body, and it's to the point where again it's gross. I guess they must have done a lot of studies on just the anatomy of everything, and it's really impressive because everything has physics attached to it, right? You see like the movement of the heart, and it sends the muscle tissue and fat. Anything that you sort of hit with your weapon or kick with your foot will have some type of feedback related to it, and it's crazy to me. It was really impressive, actually. You'll come across a lot of homes that have like pools, and the floaties that are in the pools, you'll actually see like a couple on the cover of the game here, like this flamingo on the bottom cover there. It has like air physics attached to it, so if you kick it or you throw it or do something to it, slash your weapons with it, it's actually going to bend and contort in a way that would actually be very realistic to the actual thing in real life. I haven't seen anything quite like this in a game before. It is the most impressive thing, and it does go a long way in making the combat. I think it's the saving grace for this combat system, right? Because I mentioned before it can feel a bit disconnected, but it's due to the violence and the sheer stuff that you're seeing when you're ripping these guys apart, that you definitely get a sense of accomplishment, I guess, or you get a visual feedback of, I guess, the damage that you're doing to these guys. It's just that when you're kind of going, your weapon doesn't stop when it hits something. When you hit something, usually you hit something and it bounces back, but in this game it just proceeds across the screen. So I just feel like there needs to be a better disconnect with the way the weapons look to virtually what you're hitting, at least from a feedback perspective. But the way that the zombies are torn apart is just... Thinking about it now, if you're skittish to blood or gore, this is not the game for you whatsoever. And regardless of how you actually may be interested in the world or the other stuff going on, if you can't handle blood and guts and the idea that you're tearing people open while they're still alive, you're seeing their heartbeat and just blood flowing out of their body, if that grosses you out, this is not the game for you. And no matter how exciting the rest of the game will be, you have to be able to stomach that to get through the game, because you're going to be seeing it a lot. It just blew me away, and I think it's again one of those things when I talk about it being an almost inherently current generation only experience, at least from a visual perspective. That's definitely one of those engine decisions where it just makes a point to be very visually stunning and just surprising, the level of detail that they put in there, almost to the painstaking level of accuracy that they rebuilt these environments, these rooms, these houses, and all this stuff. It's the same it can be done to the actual zombies. Yes, there's some repeats in terms of same similar zombies and stuff like that, but honestly, for the most part, you're running across these guys and you're going to be tearing them from limb, and it's going to look completely disgusting while you're doing it, and you're not going to really be looking or paying attention to their model as much as their anatomy, with the way that their body looks after a combat match. It's just... it needs to be seen for itself. You guys probably seen videos on it, but when you're watching it in real time on your screen, especially when in HDR, that just adds all this extra red and nuance to what you're seeing in the body. It's gross and it's fantastic. And it's definitely, I think, a high point for the combat system. It gives it just enough to the point where it doesn't feel completely disconnected. Again, I still feel there's more work to be done on the combat, but what they have created so far is nothing short of phenomenal. So I think the last thing I want to touch upon is the story for this game. It is not something that takes itself seriously like the first Dead Island. Where they had that trailer, they set a very weird tone, and then they delivered nothing on the actual core experience for the game when it came out. This story here is kind of lighthearted. It's not taking itself too seriously, and it's your more cliche type of story. I don't want to spoil much or give away any story details, but you kind of see where this story is leading. We've seen this type of story told many times before. It's a zombie game, so it's like it's going to deal with a lot of the same kind of cliches when it comes to that. But the writing here is done in a way where it kind of is almost satire. There at the same time, there's actually a lot of well-developed characters in this game. In fact, a lot of your companions, your side characters that you'll go and talk to and you'll get missions from them, I actually felt quite connected to them. You know, I felt that they were pretty well developed. I enjoyed their company. They didn't get annoying at any part, and when they were telling some jokes, some of the jokes I laughed at alongside them. So I feel that the writing for the characters is just so much more better than we ever got with the first game, because it was almost embarrassing with the original Dead Island. But here it's done in a way that is, I think, very appropriate for what the game is actually doing with all of its different, you know, gameplay pillars, and the actual tone of the game is consistent to what we were actually shown originally. So I think this is a very solid game from a writing perspective. But yeah, the overall story is not the selling feature here. It is the weakest point. And I have to say, I'm very sorry to actually say this, and I was very disappointed and surprised, but this game ends almost leaving things completely unresolved. And it's been many years since I played a game with a story like this. I think the best comparison I can make is that for those of you who have been subscribed to me for a very long time and remember when I streamed the end of Kingdom Come Deliverance, the way I felt almost the same exact way, not to that level of disappointment, but almost the same exact way with the ending of Dead Island 2. I didn't realize I was at the very end of the game until the credits started rolling, and I was like, wait, it feels like you're ending the game 2/3 of the way through the actual story, and I don't know if they're going to DLC the rest or what they're going to be doing for the future there. But yeah, I was pretty disappointed with the way that this story kind of ended and turned out, and it felt to me that they kind of just almost ran out of money or ran out of time, and maybe they just wanted to sell more DLC for the game. It was very almost insulting to have gone through a almost 40-hour game experience, playing the entire game, doing all those side missions, and then to round up with the conclusion that was it wasn't even a conclusion at all. It barely constitutes for a conclusion, and leaves things completely unresolved. So I was very disappointed at that. The game isn't about the story. It doesn't, that's not why you're going to want to play this game at all, but it did bother with trying to tell you a story, and what you basically got was nothing at the very end. Again, leaving things completely unresolved. It feels like they just stopped, like the writing just stopped, and you just read 2/3 of a book with the last third just not being published whatsoever. That being said, I do feel that the side missions have significantly better writing than the actual main story. Some of the side missions have nice twists and are told in a very kind of quick way, so you can kind of go through them. They all have different eccentric characters that you'll come across as well, so you'll meet a lot of these extra side casts through the actual side missions. And I enjoyed the side missions. They weren't very original in terms of what you were actually doing to complete the side missions, but they did take you to different locations throughout the world. They helped kind of give you a reason to explore and go out there. And luckily this game actually it's very easy when it gives you these side missions, because you don't have to go and find a lot of this stuff. It'll just place it on your map, and you just run over there, talk to this person, go to this area, and it gives you like a little barrier, like a boundary of where you can search to find the stuff that you're looking for. So you're not going to be spending a lot of wasted time just kind of wandering around wondering what to do. The game does a pretty good job of at least pointing you in the right direction that you should be heading in. So that's pretty good. But yeah, I think the side missions were probably a better use of the writing versus the overall main story of the game, which is just very, very unsatisfying, and one of the most unsatisfying stories in games for a long time. I mean, I think I got more out of Forspoken's story than I did out of this one, just to be clear. So in conclusion here, Dead Island 2 is a very, very good game. With almost all aspects of its design, the technical points, it's a resounding success. Again, there are some things that are holding this game back from being great. It's not like the game of the year. I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but this is the poster child, I think, for what you want in a AAA quality experience. Out of all the games I played this year, just going over them quickly in my head, this is the most solid as far as a quality perspective goes. Yeah, this is the most solid release that I played. It launched with virtually no issues. I played it basically close to it launch. You guys know I unboxed the game. I played it only I think I started like a week after it came out, so it's basically the launch day patch. And the game runs perfectly fine. It looks tremendous on PS5, and it does so across all different platforms. It's hard for me not to recommend this game because this is everything you'd want in a quality AAA game release that we just don't get anymore. It's almost like from a different era. And I think also from a gameplay design perspective, it's just really, really fun to play. So you almost get the best of both worlds. You get a really fun game and a game that runs and looks solid with virtually no issues and bugs and glitches, at least that I came across. There wasn't any crashes. There just wasn't anything. It was exactly how modern AAA games should come out and release. And the fact that they were able to do that after a 9-year development cycle, after changing multiple developers' hands, being recreated on a different engine, I mean, it's why I clapped at the beginning of this review. It's worth celebrating, and that alone, I think, is worth rewarding these developers, and I hope it is. I hope it does set an example, and I think I see a lot of gamers online talking about this game and just saying, like, you know, why we just had Star Wars Jedi Survivor, we just had Redfall come out in this poor quality. You know, you're buying almost betas for games these days. Why can't they all be like this? And, you know, that is the question. Why can't they all be like this? Why can't we have games released that are just as polished as this experience, that look just as good at least as this experience, and run just as well as this experience? We should go out and get it. My personal recommendation, do that. You will not be disappointed. There is something here for everyone, I feel. Alright, thank you guys very much for watching this review. If you guys play the game, let me know what you guys think, if you agree or disagree with some of my points. And if you haven't, interested to know what you guys think after this review. Okay? Talk to you guys later, and have a good one.